Okay, so we're going to start our value project here. We're going to use pencil and talk about the range of light to dark and how the light forms over an object. So what we're going to do to start is I want you to cut a strip of paper. It's a plain strip, and then draw the cross contour lines on your flat strip of paper. So those cross contour lines are the lines that go across the object to give us more detail on the form. So we're going to start with our paper nice and flat, and using a ruler or a straight edge, like right now I'm just using a folder, the edge of a folder, so that I get a nice straight line. And I want your lines to be about equally distant apart from each other. And just try not to go off the side of your paper. Try to have the lines like parallel to the edge of your strip of paper as much as possible. It's okay if it's a little off. This is just our guidance lines. We're going to erase these later. So draw them lightly. And again, if it's not perfect, that's okay. This is just going to really help us as we start drawing our paper out. And you can do them, definitely do them going the long direction of your paper. If you want, you could also add them in going the short direction of your paper. That's just going to give you a little bit more detail on your piece, and then it might help you too with the way that your paper is sculpted to have the lines going the opposite direction as well. So it starts to look something like this. If you have notebook paper and you just want to cut a piece of notebook paper, it already has the lines on there for you. You could do that, and then you could skip this step here. I'm going to go ahead and draw the lines going the opposite direction just to help me as I'm sculpting, and then drawing the sculpture gives me a little bit more detail. I'm not going to add as many in this direction. They're going to be a little further apart. But I'm still trying to keep my lines straight and not angled. So keep moving my paper over. And it's okay if they're not totally perfect distance apart from each other. And maybe one more. There we go. Okay. So I've got lines going both directions on here now. Now what we're going to do is fold it up or curl it any way you want to here. I'm going to roll it up nice and tight. You can add creases into it if you want. And we're just going to turn this paper into a sculpture. Okay, so I want it to come out and be more 3D. I'm going to twist it this way a little bit. Again, you can fold it and add creases into it. But I want you to find an interesting way to fold it, and then an interesting way to lay it. And however you lay it, that's the way you're going to draw your piece of paper. Okay, so you want to kind of play around with it and find something that is interesting and fascinating to you. So I think I like this. I just want it to be spread out a little bit more. So I'm going to crease it a little bit. There we go. So now it's a little bit more interesting and fascinating. And now what we're going to do is on a blank white piece of paper, as part of your supply list, all of your 100-point projects need to be on clean white paper, absolutely no lines on it. Okay, so that's what that drawing pad is for. You're now going to draw your sculpture. You're going to start with drawing the contour, which is the outline, and then draw in these cross contours to give me more detail of how the surface is curving. Now I only drew the cross contours on one side of my paper. I can kind of see through my paper and see them on this side. It could be helpful to draw them on both sides as well. So this is the view I'm going to have right there. I'm going to go ahead and set it out of the way, but you know what it looks like. And I'm going to bring my paper up here as far as what I am drawing. Okay, so my paper is just down here right in front of me. And on this paper, you need to fill the entire thing. Okay, from edge to edge, top to bottom. I want very little space in between your drawing and the edges of the paper. And now when I start to draw, I like to be rather sketchy with my drawings. It's more loose, it's more gestural, because I'm just getting an idea of how my piece is at the moment. Okay. So that's, see, it goes really close to the edge of my paper, all directions. I drew very, very large. So now what I'm going to do is draw in those cross contours, and that's going to help kind of tell me how my paper is curving, how it's folding. And I want you to draw really light, because what we're going to do is we're going to shade, and we're going to use a blending method of shading, talking about values and talking about light and shadows. So these cross contour lines, they're going to end up disappearing actually. And some places your lines might get really close together, and then in some other places they might get far apart from each other. So that's the reason why we drew them on here. I want you to draw them in your drawing how they look in real life on your sculpture to you. Right? Even though we drew them on the sculpture about equally distant apart, that doesn't mean they're going to appear equally distant apart right here. And especially as they curve around an object kind of further away from you, they get closer together to each other on this side. And in some places they might be kind of straight. Some areas they might have a tendency to look a little shorter. All of that's okay. If they curve up, that's going to give the illusion that's moving away from you. If the curves down, that's going to give the illusion that's closer to you. And you can draw both the lines going both directions if you drew those on there. Again, that just gives you a little bit more idea of how that paper is shaped and the form of that object. Okay, and so these areas where the lines are closer together, they should be a little darker, and you should be able to even see that on your sculpture that, oh yeah, it is a little darker in that spot, that's the way the light's hitting it a little differently right there. And then you can darken your outline once you have that set up and that looks good to you. And then our next step is to use our drawing pencils. You want to get your darkest one, and we're going to start shading in dark to light, capturing all of the values that we went over in our video. Okay. All right, so I've started working on my shading. All right, we drew the outline and then our cross contour lines to get that idea of form. So now we're going to start shading. I like to start with my dark areas and then work my way towards my lighter areas. So you can do this by adding in more pressure as you push down with your pencil, and then lessening that pressure as you go out to get lighter and lighter and lighter. Okay, so you can help by squinting your eyes to look at your sculpture, and that's going to help kind of highlight the contrast, the light areas, the dark areas as you're working on it. So I'm just starting dark areas, working my way towards lighter areas. And I always like to come back to my dark areas and make them even darker. This is the drawing part. This is where you get to exaggerate that light source and that light over your object. Really make it pop, make it look 3D. Shading is a method to show space, right? So we want this little paper sculpture to really look 3D, to show that idea of space on our flat picture plane. So I'm going to work a little bit more. I'm going to pause the video and then I'll work and I'll kind of show you my drawing as I go through different stages. Okay, so I've made a little bit more progress, so I'm just adding in a little bit recording here to show you some progress. You can see I'm starting to work into my lighter areas. You can still see those cross contour lines, so if it ends up that I want this to stay lighter, I don't want to go back and darken it, I'm going to go through with an eraser and erase those cross contour lines, which would then erase any shading I had in that area, so I would have to redo it. But those cross contour lines help show me the form, also help kind of tell you when that light is going to start changing into shadow, or that value is going to start changing, because you're turning your planes, right? So like my lines start to curve up here, that's a turn in the plane of my paper. So this is going to hit the light differently than this area here hits light. So this is my progress so far. I'm going to keep working and then I'll show you a little bit later. Okay, so I'm still working on making some more progress. I went ahead and erased some of my cross contour lines that I don't want showing. Right, like I said, in those lighter areas, if they're going to show through, I got to go ahead and erase them and then reshade in that area. So that's one thing that I'm working on right now. You can kind of see me go through that process. I'm just going to come back in and add in some of that shading. Really light with my pencil, really light on the pressure. I might not even want to like go over some areas with my pencil, and I want to just take my finger and smooth that out. And you can also roll a paper towel or another piece of paper up to smear that graphite and smooth that out. Right, paper is a pretty smooth surface, so you want to capture that smooth texture as well. And we're talking about value, shape, form, space, texture, all in this one piece. Okay, so I wanted to show you a little bit more progress that I have here. I know that smearing around with your thumb, that's something that I can see that will happen, is that you get out of your edges and you get like kind of all these little messy areas. Just go ahead and clean those up. Use your eraser. Okay, your eraser is also a drawing tool. So if I want to highlight somewhere, say like I want to highlight kind of on this little fold of my paper, I can go back in and erase, and I can use my eraser as a drawing tool to add in some highlights into my paper, right? Because some of the areas of our paper are light. They're not shadowed, they're not shaded, or they have light reflecting off of it. So that's where that eraser can come into play. Okay, so here's another update. I've been using my eraser, adding in some highlighted areas in here. Still all looking at my sculpture itself, right? So I'm trying to capture all the little wrinkles and bends and folds in my paper sculpture. Still working on this area. I'm pretty satisfied with this area, and I'm getting satisfied with this area, but this one I'm not so satisfied with. I still need a lot of work there. But I also want you to include the shadow on the table, right? So if you drew kind of small, this is where you could really exaggerate and start to fill up your paper, right? I wanted you to fill your entire page. So thinking of your light source, like my light source is kind of coming from behind my piece of paper and above it. So my shadow is going to be down here at the bottom. But maybe if you have a lot of empty space on your paper, you want to change your light source and make your light source from a different angle and add like an exaggerated shadow on a different side. But I'm going to add my shadow in down here, and then I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, so I have my shadow in here. Now my shadow on the table, I left a little rough looking and not so smooth, so that way there's a different texture between the table and my sculpture. I also kind of added in a faint line behind my paper sculpture so that it gives a sense of the table, a sense of ground, so that the sculpture is not just floating in space. I still have a lot of white space up here, and something that I can do, like this is a really light part of my paper, so something that I can do to exaggerate the lightness of my paper here is to shade in the background. And I have a lot of graphite on my fingers, so I'm just using that instead of adding in from my pencil. And I'm just gonna kind of circular patterns, add in some graphite right in here. So I want it to still be smooth, and then if I got a little bit on my paper, I can come back with my eraser and I can lift that up again because I want my paper to look super white right there. Right, that's like my highlight, the lightest part of my paper. And then if you feel like the edge is kind of blurry, like I feel like my edge is not very clear, I'm just gonna lightly do a little line. It doesn't even have to connect all the way to the either edge, but that little line just gives a nice definition, just a tiny little bit. That's all you need. This is a fairly flat plane for my sculpture, the very top of it, because I kind of had a crease in there, so there's not as much shading on the very, very top, but just a little bit. And I think I'm gonna come over and lighten up some right here on my edges, right in here, because that's also capturing quite a bit of light, so I'm gonna add in some dark around here, like I did before with my finger. Just smoothing that out, going in circular motions, making it really large, because I want it to blend into the white of the background. Okay, and then I can use my eraser again, and I can come in and start to lift some of that graphite up, making my paper a little bit lighter right in here. All right, so I lifted some of that out, and now I can come back in again and blend out those edges that got a little bit too erased. There we go. See, that looks so much better, a lot more like my sculpture. All right, so I would say that this is a finished piece now, and once you are here to this point, by the end of class on Friday, you'll take a picture and submit it on Canvas.